Hello, Kinderguppies. It's Mr. McComb once again, and I've got another book to read with you. This book is called Mr. Brave, and the really exciting thing about this book is once we open it up, it's not just about Mr. Brave. We get to see some of our other friends from some of our other books that we've read with Mr. Brave. It's going to be so exciting. Are you all ready? Well, that's good, because here we go. Mr. Brave is not as strong as Mr. Strong, and he is not as tall as Mr. Tall. But that does not stop him from being brave, as you will all soon see. Now, last Tuesday, little Mrs. Bossy invited Mr. Brave to her house for tea. "And don't be late," little Mrs. Bossy shouted on the phone. It was a very stormy day, but Mr. Brave knew that little Miss Bossy's temper was even worse than the storm. So he set off down the road for little Miss Bossy's house, hurrying along as fast as he could to make sure that he was not late for tea. Along the way, Mr. Brave heard a cry for help. It was Mr. Messy. Mr. Messy had been blown off the road and into the river by the strong, stormy winds. Mr. Brave did not want to be late for little Miss Bossy's house, but, being the brave, upstanding friend that he was, he jumped into the water and saved Mr. Messy. Now, Mr. Brave was totally soaking wet, but he hurried off down the road, running as fast as he could. Suddenly, he heard somebody crying loudly. Who could that be? He wondered. It was little Miss Summersault. She was balancing on a tightrope tied between two tall trees. "Oh, Mr. Brave, I'm so lonely," she sobbed. "Nobody will come up and play with me on my tightrope. They are all too scared to be so high up. But you're so brave, Mr. Brave. Won't you come and play with me?" Mr. Brave looked up. He looked way, way up at little Miss Summersault. Then he thought about little Miss Bossy. But, being the brave, upstanding friend that he was, he felt sad for little Miss Summersault, and he climbed up onto her tightrope so she didn't have to be lonely. They talked and chatted happily for a while, until Mr. Brave happened to look down at the rope. "Little Miss Summersault," he said, "look, the rope is going to snap. We're going to fall, and it's such a long, long way down." "Oh, dear me! Oh, help me!" Mr. Brave called out in a panic. "Be brave, Mr. Brave," reminded little Miss Summersault. And, without any more warning than that, she jumped down to the ground, carrying him safely with her. "Oh, thank you," said Mr. Brave, with a sigh of relief. Little Miss Summersault said goodbye, and Mr. Brave was left on his own. But now he was shaking like a leaf, and scared. "I don't deserve to be called Mr. Brave. I'm so scared. Thank goodness nobody knows my secret," he said to himself. And nobody does know his secret. Or do they? Little Miss Trouble just happened to be passing down the road, and she had seen everything. And what she had seen and heard had given her an idea, a very naughty idea, and she grinned her mischievous grin. "Hey, come here, everybody! Come and see this!" Little Miss Trouble shouted at the top of her voice. Very quickly, a large crowd gathered. "I have an announcement," announced little Miss Trouble. "Did you all know that Mr. Brave isn't brave at all?" "No, that can't be true," said the crowd all together. "But it is true," said little Miss Trouble, "and I'll prove it to you. Mr. Brave," continued little Miss Trouble, I dare you to walk across that tightrope right now." Mr. Brave looked up at the tightrope, and all the crowd looked up at the tightrope too. Then all the crowd looked at Mr. Brave. Then Mr. Brave suddenly remembered something, a very important something. "Oh, just look at the time!" Mr. Brave cried. "I'm going to be late for my tea with little Miss Bossy." "I must leave," he cried, "or else I'll be late." And with that he ran off as quickly as possible. "Hooray!" cheered the crowd, and they all clapped and applauded Mr. Brave's decision. Little Miss Trouble looked puzzled. "Why are you all cheering for him?" she said. "He ran away. He isn't brave at all. He didn't go on the tightrope." "Oh, yes, he's brave!" the crowd all shouted. "Would you turn up late for tea at little Miss Bossy's house?" Little Miss Trouble thought for a moment. "Oh, goodness me! He is brave after all," she said in awe. Well, here we are again, Kinderguppies, at the end of another book that we got to share. I sure do love reading to you, and I hope you enjoy listening to me. During this book, Mr. McComb felt a little bit grumpy when he saw how little Miss Trouble was acting. She wasn't acting like an upstander. She was trying to trick little Mr. Brave, and that made me upset. But it all worked out in the end. I sure hope you've enjoyed this story. And remember, guys, Mr. McComb will talk to you all later.